throughout all the talks. I've been here all day. It's really been great to hear everyone. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take a look at 15 trends that I believe are actually reshaping, redefining how we market. So this is very focused on, I think, how our jobs change collectively. And it's based on what we do with the Fortune 500 over the last, say, 6 or 7 years, and then also stuff I learned when I was at Dell working for Michael. So let me start out with one. You can always go to slides like this where nothing wrong with them at all, but they're like 60,000 feet in the air, and we don't know exactly what are the fundamental truths that are actually changing what we do. So that would be my last one that I show you like that. So the first one here is when we think of big data and everything that's happening in the marketplace, the interesting thing is, what does it actually do? What do we do as human beings? And what we find is that human beings make things simple. So it doesn't matter what you throw at us, we go back and we say, how do we make this simple? So what habits do we have? Well, if you think about Q&As for a brand, take any brand you have, we don't think of more than 200 to 400 questions about any brand. We're just not really capable of doing it. The question is, what are they? If there's an issue, we have any kind of issue that hits, what studies and data show is that there's no more than about 77 questions that we can think to ask about any issue. So what are they? If we have people who are driving influence in a marketplace, there's never more than 50 people in any market in the world for any brand that drive the majority share of conversation. If you look at how many words or phrases drive people towards our stories, there's usually an average of about 15 words or phrases that drive the majority of traffic to our story through search. So we make the world actually quite finite. So then the question becomes, what is that? And that's a whole exercise in itself. Now the other thing is, when you think about human behavior, what are we actually learning? And we know that human beings follow very predictable patterns, right? So when you create new models, you always have to get down to it and say, what is the actual pattern that people are following? And there's always one. We're snowflakes to our parents, or we think our kids are snowflakes, but the reality is we actually do things in a very common way. There's 3 key drivers of behavior we see over and over. Does not matter if we're in China, Brazil, or here. And it is that people want to share ideas, they want to share knowledge, and they want to solve problems to help their peers. So they're very rarely driven to help a company. They don't mind if the company is a relevant peer, but they're driven in one of these 3 ways to actually make the world a better place. The other thing is, when we look at how content is flowing online, there's generally 5 drivers of content flow. In healthy brands, what we see in thousands of examples is usually blogs and Twitter are about 2/3 of flow. Facebook wall is a very important news place. Does not matter how the algorithm changes, it's very important. Mainstream news, of course, and then we go to video or visual. We prefer to learn visually. The way our brains are wired, we would prefer to go visual first, text second. But the reality is, if you think about what we create, we tend to go with text first, visual second, because that's the way we've been kind of trained in our corporate lives. So we've got to readjust and say, how do people actually want to accept content? Then we get into brands. So if you're running a brand, you're actually in the talent business today. And there's a reason why you're in the talent business, because you can actually decide who should be telling your story, right? The old school was that we would say, who do you know? Who are the influencers? Who are the advocates? Who are the journalists? And then you figure out who to go to. Your gut feel is probably very good. You probably actually do know to a degree. But the reality in today's world, you can build algorithms so you know for sure. So if you think about it, the way content moves online, in the old days, you would have news and you go to 5 or 6 people and they move the news, right? And everyone else would repackage and share. In today's world, when you actually look at with the right algorithms, you see that there's never more than 50 people and they make that kind of impact. So to give you an example of this, we work with Warner Brothers and Harry Potter. There's not more than 50 people in the US who have moved the majority of conversation for Harry Potter. Yet there's millions of people who actually will share and talk and do something. So the question is, who are those folks? The other thing is that people who are creators of content, which is less than 1% of any market, follow patterns as well. So if you're a creator of content, you actually usually don't know how you get inspired for your next piece, because you're not thinking about it. But if you follow that trail and people go all over the place, and you look at who they link to and who they quote from and where they get content, there's no more than 4 people usually that they're inspired by. So now you can sit there and go, who are the 50 people who should be telling my story? Who are the next 50? Who are the next 50? who influences each of those folks, and then who do they influence. And then you decide over time how you shift the market to who's telling the story correctly for you. So we're in a better position than we've ever been to get our story told well. I'll just tell you a quick story here on Ezra Klein is now long gone from the Washington Post. But when he was there, very hard guy to reach. But what you would find out when you do the work is that actually the number one influencer of Ezra is a guy named Austin Fracht, who writes a blog called The Incidental Economist, who no one in the world ever has heard of. I'm sure you've never heard of him. But he's so good at the content that he creates that it influences what Ezra writes. So there's thousands of people like that for you that are actually shaping the world. The question is, who are they and where are they? Now, the other thing is focus, or what I would call alignment. So one of the classic mistakes we're making in marketing and communications today is we say, okay, now we know who the right people are, so let's give them everything, because then they're going to do something with it. But it's kind of like having a handshake, having alignment. And what we find is that if you're really aligned with an audience, you know that if I know these are the influencers for aerospace in this example, I know that there's certain influencers who only care about safety. And there's certain that only care about engines. And there's certain that only care about the environment. So if you just give them the content that they actually want, they actually move it and share it and like it more, and you see an exponential increase. If you give that same group everything because you want them to be fully informed on your brand, you turn them off. And it doesn't mean they won't do anything because they basically like you, right? They're already on board, but you're desensitizing them. And that is happening all the time, which we see in the marketplace. Now, big data is something that I think is one of the most overused terms right now. Big data is actually really easy to ingest. It's not that hard. It's small data excellence that matters. And you heard that a couple times today. So what does that mean? It means that we're moving towards a stage that I would say is forensic analytics. So if you think back in time, we always do market segmentation. And we'd say, here's our target audiences, here's our subtopics, and all that. Well, in today's world, you would think that there might be 20, 30, or 40 filters for a brand. So for brand X, I would say, who's the antagonist filter? So in your world, it could be something like PETA, for example. Well, why don't we look at exactly what they're saying? We could see every single person who's ever written something or said something on their behalf and use that as a filter. Or it could be sustainability, CSR. Or it could be the 5 characteristics of the brand. Or it could be anything else. But the key thing is you're listening very specific to the filter that matters for your brand, and you're cutting out all the other noise. And a lot of times what we're doing when we're actually looking at data today is we're looking at too much data, it's too big a picture, and it looks like it might be going the right direction, but we're actually looking at the wrong data. So we have to get smart and smaller and actually go from there. Now, the next thing is, how do people gather? So what we find is that, it looks like there's just lots of people out there, of course, but what we find is that people gather either by profession or passion. They might, people can just be out there randomly, but when people are going to gather and go back to a community on a regular basis, it's one of those two. And so in this day and age, you can actually find exactly who those folks are, put them into an index and track them, and then you can see exactly what they're doing. So I'll give you an example of this. This is something where healthcare providers, if you're talking about physicians, for example, well, it's very easy to see exactly who they are, track them, and know exactly what cardiologists are saying in St. Louis today, or last week, or last month, or last year. But you can do this for B2B suppliers. You can do this for your vendors. You can do this for your sales reps, anyone that you want to track. You can say, I'm going to verify who they are, see what they're doing, and then you say, now I know what content they like, I know what time of day they go online, I know who influences them, and I start to look at it very differently. This is another example in the IT world, where Spiceworks is a great example where they have community, where everyone talks about IT. But now you can actually say, I want to just follow people who are into security on the enterprise level, at a manager level, these 3 jobs. Here are the 50,000 people who have those jobs. Here they are. What are they saying? So again, the ability to get more specific means we can get more focused in our spend. It means we can actually measure better, and we can actually then make better judgments as to what kind of campaigns we do against groups like this. Now, paid media. I like paid media. I think it's very important, and I don't see a time where it ever won't be. But we have a big advantage that's right in front of us, which is the move to what I would call smart media. So if we think of earned, shared, and owned is really our customers telling us what matters, right? I mean, earned, they're out in the wild doing whatever they think is important. Shared, they're coming to one of our channels and they're showing us what they care about. And owned, they're coming to us for a very specific reason. So if we look at that correctly, we can actually see what our customers are doing and influence where paid should be done. So in the future, the media planning model, in my view, it may literally flip. So earned is driving paid. It will at the least be on parity between earned and paid. I'll give you a quick example of this is that, in this time frame, you could say now, if I have a brand in 40 countries, you could say, okay, let's find the 10,000 people in order who love the category and the brand that we're talking about. And now let's look at 40 times 10,000, and let's see what they're telling us. And let's see how that matches up against our paid plan and see what we're missing and see where we're overspending. And then you just correct it. So it's very interesting to look at it that way. So now, when you get into earned media, shared, and actually earned and shared, there's only 10 channels of online. And this really hasn't changed in a while. I actually did this chart back in 2006 when I was at Dell. It's still the same. It doesn't matter what comes out of China, India, any other place. There's 10 channels. So if you actually analyze where your conversations and activities are occurring online for your brand, you can actually then stack rank the channels. And what you see is that those channels will change in importance by country, by language, by topic, by subtopic, by issue. So if you imagine just one country and you said there's 5 topics that matter for this brand, you may have a different mix for each one. But by doing that, you can say, okay, it's really obvious that we should be going deeper in Facebook. It's really obvious that we should not be doing a lot on LinkedIn. It's really obvious that we need to go deeper into forums because something's going on here and we can't quite explain it. And usually what you see, not always, but usually you see that about 4 out of the 10 channels are really important. It's exceptionally rare that all 10 channels are cooking with gas and everything's going full speed. And I can't actually think of an example where that's occurred. The other thing we're moving into is how do you actually test paid media more effectively? So companies today are starting to tinker with this, where they say, okay, if we're buying flights, roughly on a quarterly basis, and we actually know the audiences we're trying to reach, okay, we're going to go do that. But then we can take earned media at the same time by segment and put it into the market at the same time, in some cases even including the ad or the campaign theme, and see what happens. So by the time you get to the next flight, you can say 2 out of the 5 target segments are doing fantastic. One of them, we're not sure, nothing's happening. We got to see why we're not connecting. And the other 2, not working. So you then adjust your campaign as you go. And that is something I think is going to have to occur as a hybrid between client and agency. Because I don't think you can just say, hey, agency, you go do it. I think it's going to be the 2 together. Because it's okay to get the truth if we're going to do the right thing. I think sometimes for agencies it's a little scary to admit to you that their advertising is not being effective, but it's actually really easy to prove what's working and what's not working when we do things like this, which is quite interesting. Now, CRM. CRM means a lot of things to people, but the way I like to think of it is the way I grew up with CRM, is people would say, well, we're going to go out and hit 10 million people, and then we'll have 0.01% of people respond, and then we'll go from there. We keep building it up, right? I can't imagine walking into a boardroom today and saying, hey, I got this great new idea. We're going to go out to our customers on a weekly basis, hit them with a story every time. 99.9% of them will hate it and actually resent us for doing it, but 0.1% will love it. I just can't imagine going, that's a brilliant idea. Let's do that as fast as we can. Well, in today's world, actually, we don't need the top of the funnel anymore. So I realize that people won't just get rid of it because we move slow to evolve. But it's really not that necessary in most cases, and here's why. Is that if you actually look at Twitter as an example, you can actually see who are if you're doing 10 million to get to 100,000, if you have the right profiling, you can actually see who the 100,000 are right now online. So you don't have to do all that work to find the exact people that you go to. You match them up with email, and then you go from there. And then when you give those folks your content, you watch where they go. And they lead you to the next million people. And you're getting people who are all like-minded, who like exactly the same content that you're interested in. And you've just built a social CRM that you're not even paying for. It's not in a relational database. It's actually just out in the open. But you know exactly who the folks are, and you can index them. So the way that we're going to be doing CRM is going to change again in favor of the client and in favor of doing it in a much more effective and targeted way from the very beginning. But that's the headline, is that the top of the funnel is increasingly irrelevant. So now, responsive design and responsive experience. So it wasn't that long ago, it might even be today in many cases, that we were also excited to talk about responsive design. You know, it's just so important that in any device we use that the same experience comes up, and we said that that was great. And that's cool, there's nothing wrong with it. But the problem we have now, which was said earlier today, is that the majority of the world has grown up mobile first. The majority of this room probably has grown up PC first, like me. So we're PC first, and then we go to mobile, and we try to make things work. But the majority of the world is looking at it very differently. They need to have the right experience right away. If they don't have the right experience right away, they're gone. So responsive design doesn't cut it. It has to be responsive experience. So if we're doing responsive experience, it means we have to be much better at understanding how do we get the right content to people at the right time. And so that sounds like a daunting thing to do, but the reality is it's not when you look at some of the technology that's already out there. So this is just an example here where with today's kind of technology that we can use, if you go to the very beginning of search, we can see exactly what people are searching for, of course, right? You can see their path and see exactly what media they're interacting with, and then you can see exactly who's coming into your site. We tend to focus on how people are coming into our channel or our site, and we do most of our metrics there, and yet the majority of the opportunity is further out when people are actually starting their journey. Then the other thing is when you think about effective targeting, technology out there today allows us to do things like this. So if I'm coming into a site like this and I say I'm looking for a government white paper, well, behind this site is, let's say, 30, 40 different experiences, because we know every single kind of person who will come into this site. And so based on the trigger words that they're putting in there and searching for, they go right to this. They go right to the government white paper. So they now have a responsive experience. So it's the exact same content that's already on the website. It's just reorganized so the experience matches up right away. So as long as people are willing to give us a little bit of information by how they search and what they're looking for, you can do this. And so this is an example of, hopefully in like 3 or 4 years, this is old school. But the ability to target to improve that experience is key. Now, when we built websites and things like that for years, when we did taxonomies, we always would say that, you know, how should we build the site? And someone would say, well, the research shows put this in the left corner, this in the right corner, and then people have their opinions. I think this should look like this, and this should go here. And it was basically brand-created taxonomy. Now we're moving towards things that I would call market-driven taxonomy. And I wish I could show you this exact example. This is a little hard to see here, but I'm going to tell you the anecdote, is that we were asked about 2 years ago for Red Bull to basically figure out, with all of their volume that they get, how do they reach the next 100 million customers? And you're like, oh, that's really kind of interesting way to look at it, because they have so much stuff happening. So by doing a market-based taxonomy, you actually can see exactly what the marketplace cares about related to Red Bull and competitors. And it's a series of filters. So you can now see, okay, if we're talking about a certain sport, and it's a skateboarder, and it's this athlete, and it's in Chicago, here's exactly what's happened over the last year, last day, last week, versus Red Bull, versus whatever set of data you want to look at. So it allows you to see the truth of whether or not your information is actually being spent right in terms of the actual impact you make. It's a game changer in that respect. While you have that information, you now have the information you need to do market-driven taxonomies to rebuild your website against the content that your customers are already looking for. So you're not guessing. You know, you already know what they're doing, and you already know how to filter it and you already know how to get to a better experience. So again, these answers are right there. This is just an example if you want to do it for like a B2B version, and you say, like let's say I'm an IT professional, and we work with companies like HP and Intel and others, right? So you just look at every single category of person, every single title, every single person that's out there. It's not that hard to get all this information. What do you want to know? And then you start to get, because people would always say, well, CIOs, what do they believe? Why guess? Why not find out? And the reality is, as you know, the higher up you get in the food chain in terms of a title, the less talking people usually do. So then you have to figure out, of course, the art of that is then figure out like, who are those folks around them that influence them the most, what are they saying, and then put it together. But you can prove that kind of stuff. So you then have a quantitative approach to reaching a very targeted market in B2B. Campaigns. So a while back we were asked by a company, a Fortune 50 company, that said, when we're doing campaigns, they're taking the same time as everyone else. They're taking 6 to 9 months. They're not that not that they're not effective. They take too long. By the time they come on the market, they're old school. What do we do? What's next? And so what we realize in doing this is that you still do campaigns because you have to do campaigns to launch new brands, and very important to catalyze the market and tell your story well. But for a lot of the money in the future, we're moving towards real-time campaigning. So in this case, what you do is we just built panels of tens of thousands of people that are related to the area that they want to focus on. You watch what's happening in that area, and then you can see within a couple of hours what you can put in the market that is relevant. And if you do that, it works. If you miss the window, it doesn't work. So the way I like to always talk about it with clients is I just say, it's kind of like being on the side of a river. And if I'm on the river and I'm looking across and you come down here and I talk to you, we hear each other. If I come an hour later, you're not there, so I'm not talking to anyone. So the ability to align to the market in real time is the biggest secret to getting campaigns done right. And this, unfortunately, I can't tell you the exact details of the assignment and everything else, but the message from this slide is it works. Now, you have to have good content. You have to make sure you got the timing right. There's a lot of variables. But we're on to something that really is going to put brands that want to do this into like a 365 mindset. That we're really, if you think about it, political campaigns, that's what they do, right? They're out every day, every night. I mean, they don't stop. And the brands that are building the most share online are going to be the ones who are out there treating this like a campaign with occasional bursts of new content. Now, little things come up that are really, really obvious. In fact, all of them are really obvious when you get into the results. But if you look at the upper left here, this is Coke Zero, right? So Coke Zero, when you looked at the market at that time, was putting all their content out at lunchtime, because I guess they had been told that people should or like to talk about Coke Zero at lunchtime. So if you look at the chart, it shows that most people talk about it at night, right? So what we said to them is, if you are trying to avoid your customers, you have figured out the perfect strategy, right? And it was like, okay, why isn't this working? Well, there's something underlying this. Is if you go back to my first 2 slides, we're a big believer in studying what are the fundamental things shaping the marketing world, period. So before you get to a model, what's changing? Or maybe what never changed, but now we're aware we can see it. Well, the prime time for content online, almost everywhere in the world, in fact, really everywhere in the world, is 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. So it can differ depending on the brand or the country, but it's generally at night. And why is that? Because we're not at work and our kids are in bed and we can focus. And then you get into B2B segments, same thing. So people are like, oh, no, B2B, like we're at work, they're at work, we got to reach them. That doesn't work that well. So even if you put out content in the morning, remember to put out again at night. And so the question is, each day of the week, what is your best day of the week? What is the exact right hour? And how do you know that? And by the way, what is it for your competitors? And so you just start thinking like, okay, there's a lot of stuff here that could give us an edge. Now, indexing the right historical information for a market. So there's a lot of talk out there about predictive marketing, and it's very tricky to do. And I think when people say they know exactly where a market's going, I get very wary about that. But you can do things with history that are pretty cool. So this is an example here where with Warner Brothers, we work on everything that comes out, like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and Superman, Batman, and all that stuff, you know? And so one of the things they were saying was like, how do you know when you should be using which channels leading up to a movie, and then from a movie to DVD, and then a game, and then the next movie if it's a franchise, which is almost always the case these days, right? So what we did is we indexed every single movie that Warner Brothers ever put out. We looked at all their competitor movies, big set of movies. Actually, originally started with over 10,000 movies, and then we had to, our geeks got out of control, and then we had to narrow it down so we get more focused. And then we looked at all the variables that go into play, time of the year and weather patterns and all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, the point being is that this is highly statistically valid, and we can tell which channels to use by week leading up to theatrical release, and then from theatrical release to DVD, game, and next movie. So why is that relevant here? Every time you're doing a campaign, you're doing something probably similar to what you've done at Purina before. So if you actually looked at the history of what you've done, and you looked at the history of your competitors, you would actually know more than your competitors about exactly what channels to use by week or by day. You would know how to outsmart them. You'd know their exact patterns, and so you could understand when they're launching how to, quite frankly, go around them and actually block them a little bit. It's a game changer in terms of thinking through what's actually happening in the market. So now we get into, this is like a glimpse at the next phase of that, is we're looking at social research. So basically we're saying, why don't we take the best of primary research, you know, primary research, polling, all that stuff, combine it with social analytics and see if there's something there. And so to be candid, I was excited about this but deeply skeptical about it as we were getting started, which I think is good. We've heard being a cynic sometimes is a positive. This is something we did over a period of time. You'll see the time frame here. It's actually rather long. And we basically said, okay, we're going to do primary research, and then we're going to look at like what is happening socially, and then what's actually happening with sales. And when you look at this, you'll see that those are pretty close to being the same. What it means is you can't just look socially and say, oh, that's it. That's what the sales will be. But if you can find the right set of data to look at versus the sales that you have, you can start to get at least predictive in terms of which way you're going in the market. And there's a little bit of behind the scenes there, which just say a little bit is, actually I'll give you maybe a better example here. This is a little bit bumpier. This is millennials and children's clothing. We're actually able to at least predict that we believe there's a problem up ahead, and then it turns out that there is. So these are things that I still don't feel comfortable enough to say you can do that in advance and be sure. I would not say that. But I would say is that we're getting enough data now that you can actually, if you combine sales and the right research, we're actually getting pretty close to understanding what's going on here. And that's exciting. A couple more here. Another one is China. So with China, I've been looking at China quite a bit for a while, but I started to go deeper because I'm fascinated by how they're innovating. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that China started by imitating what we do here. I mean, that's really what they did. But they now are moving into iterative innovation that is it's blowing us away, I think, in a sense. And why is that? It's because they don't have any limitations at all. So they're saying, okay, WeChat, kind of like Instagram, we like location, we want instant messaging, put it together. We're in Youku, people like YouTube, they like Netflix, let's put it together. So they're just mashing together what we like. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because that's actually what customers like, right? And so what really is happening is what we refer to as Lego analytics, but it's basically customers are on a journey. They rarely go one place and that's it. So they're going to a channel and then another channel and another channel. So the question is, how many do they go to make a decision? And do you know the exact path? And is that the path that you're putting media against? And what I find when we ask people is they actually don't know. In fact, they never know because they do everything by a channel and then they measure a channel, realizing, or maybe not realizing that actually it's usually 2 or 3 that will form that full decision, which makes sense because for many years, even back to David Ogilvy days, he'd say, well, in advertising, you have to have at least 6 times that you're exposed to an ad before you do something. So why would it be once now, right? Nothing's really changed in our brains. So where are those 6, and what's happening, and how do we get there? Anyway, there's a lot to learn in China, which is just really cool. One-to-one outreach, what's happening here? So the 1990 model is a relatively well-accepted model now, right? Less than 1% of people in a market create content. About 9% of people share content. I've never seen a market get higher than 20. The most passionate markets, maybe 20. And then 90% of people lurk and learn. They absorb everything that the 1 and the 9 do. So if we look at where we could go, this is back to the example I just gave before, is I believe that brands will start to build their own media networks. So you will start to think, people say think like a publisher. I think actually think like your NBC. And start to think like, well, what if I did have 1,000 to 10,000 people by country, by topic, worldwide, region, whatever it is, and I know exactly who is on board. Because today you can say, who are the 1,000 people in the US for this brand who, if I give them something, will move it. You can say, here they are, from 1 to 1,000 in order of their activity. So why not do that, right? But if you do that at scale, you're now actually in the media business. And I think that's going to be very powerful, not just for research, but to actually move the needle for sales. So that's a to be done, TBD type thing. Next one here is moving from gut feel to science for word of mouth. So we often build new models because we get frustrated by the existing model and we know it's not right, and so we just kind of keep fussing at it. So word of mouth, I think people always tell you that they know how to do word of mouth. They talk about viral marketing, and they're always doing it retrospectively, if you notice. They don't really know exactly how it's working. So what we did is we actually built an alpha in the state of Texas, and we actually said, okay, the DMA structure is based on population. That seems like an old school model. Don't know how word of mouth is working. What if we actually look at town, city, state, out, and index all the content that people consume on topics and see what happens? So for politics, what we did is we looked at all the political issues that people could think about, what Democrat or Republican. We indexed 6 million articles at a time, every time there's a refresh. And it turns out there's 130 towns in Texas that matter. So the DMA structure is not at all a good one to use. And you can see by topic area which towns matter. So if you're talking about healthcare, there may be 22 towns that really matter a lot. And then in each town, you can see exactly who the influencers are. So now you're in the business of understanding who's driving the message, who cares about the message, and what parts of the country. So the future of this is that you would actually be putting a new campaign into the market in a country like the US, and you'd say, well, there's 543 towns that need to light up for us to really be moving word of mouth for this market. And we'd say, okay, 200 are, but 200 or 343 aren't. And so you would know where to focus to move the market, to move in the direction you want, because you know historically exactly what people do. We actually let this be used for the governor's race because we thought, let's give it to them and see if it's really, truly valid. They loved it. They said it was the best thing they've ever had in terms of how to get targeted. Last thing here is the shift from advertising to storytelling, or storytizing. It's actually the next book that I'm writing is called Storytizing. And it's basically, how is the way that we tell stories changing? And so what we're seeing here is basically that we've always made people go somewhere. And yet what people really want to do is those 3 things I mentioned in the beginning. So how do we take our whole story and actually provide it right to them so they can decide what to do with it, or contribute to it, or take some of the content and create their own story? So the ability to liberate people is a key thing, and there's just one example of this. If you think of it as simple as a portable website, and if I said, I'm taking a key brand for Purina, and I've got a video, and then I'm surrounding it with FAQs and a slide deck and another video and a key testimonial and 5 places to share it, and here's something we're featuring on Facebook, and like you've got everything that you want to know on the brand is right there, but now you can actually use it as paid media. You can actually embed it in any channel. You can put it where you want. So I think it was said earlier that the point of sale is changing. It's not always coming to us. It's often going to the customer, and that's why we have to get really good at storytizing, because we should be providing the story and the ability to buy directly to the customer wherever they are. So, and then watch what they do. So we can then see where they go, what they like. And then if you do this well, you can actually change the content dynamically as well. So that's, in the time I had, 15 concepts. There's 15 more, I can assure you, but that's enough for now. Is there any questions? I know that the group has only asked like one or two each time, but we have a minute and a half if there's a question or two. No. Okay. Guys are at the end of the day. Well, thank you for having me.